The problem with history is that it takes so long to happen. By the time one generation has worked through the important lessons, another generation's replaced it. And we seem doomed to do some of the same stupid things over and over again. You'd think we'd learn, or at least you'd think we'd learn some of the basic lessons. In a country based on freedom, equal opportunity, and democracy, you'd think that lessons related to social justice would not need to be rehashed so often. But that does seem to be our fate. And so in every generation, we've witnessed one group after another struggle to claim their own share of the American dream. This was true in the Civil Rights era, when after 100 years of waiting patiently for the rights black people had been promised with the 13th and 15th Amendments, it took marches, assassinations, and riots and legislation to begin to deliver justice to African Americans. The women's suffrage movement began in the mid-1800s, and it took nearly 70 years before women got the vote. Women still don't receive equal pay for equal work. That battle is still being fought. Every immigrant that has ever come to this country has had to fight tooth and nail to move up the economic ladder. It isn't right, and it isn't fair, but after so many historic boomerangs, it isn't any surprise either. It's the 21st century, and in way too many places, women are still having to fight so they don't have to raise their skirts before they can move forward. Our Hispanic citizens have also had their own fair share of fighting for the rights and equality that the Constitution promises every citizen. Music has had a huge role in raising awareness, unifying people, inspiring empathy, and challenging the status quo in every major social wave of change. Today, we're looking at how American music was used, like the trumpets at Jericho, to knock down the walls that separated Hispanic Americans from the promises made to all Americans beginning in 1776. In many ways, this is a fight that continues today. There aren't enough people out there who have a giver's gain mentality. When people actively deny others the opportunity to rise, they're behaving like it means they have to lose. So why is that? Welcome to today's episode, American Song and the Fight for Hispanic Equality.
Step down off your high horse, mister. You don't get lard less than you boil a hog. Have one of these Seegers. I brought them all the way from New Orleans. Were you going to tell my Tennesseans that a good many men, sound men all, had a plot to ease the suffering of the people in these parts? Or were you going to tell them that Steve Austin, Houston, and others, and you too, Travis, had planned to declare for a republic? To declare this the Republic of Texas? Were you going to tell them that, Travis?
I hadn't thought this was generally known.
Well, it isn't yet. Not till Austin separates the sheep from the goats. Not till he decides who's on the right side. Republic. I like the sound of the word. Means people can live free, talk free, go or come, buy or sell, be drunk or sober, however they choose. Some words give you a feeling. Republic is one of those words that makes me tight in the throat. Same tightness a man gets when his baby takes his first step, or his first baby shaves and makes his first sound like a man. Some words can give you a feeling that make your heart warm. Republic is one of those words.
van a mirar esta bandera hacia arriba y hundidos en su sangre. ¡Viva México! ¡Pero viva México libre!
The Mexican-American War in the 1840s was a land grab by the United States to increase its territory toward the West. At the time, a U.S. president went and provoked a fight with Mexico to create the opportunity he needed to seize Mexican land. If it happened today, people would be talking about it like we're talking now about Putin attacking Ukraine. It's an uncomfortable truth, but it's accurate. Sorry if you don't like it. I didn't start that war. It ended with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, and we swallowed up basically 2/3 of the land that was then part of Mexico. But what good's territory that doesn't have anyone you can tax? So we promised Mexicans that we'd treat them nicely if they'd stay put. We'd even make them U.S. citizens with all the rights and privileges, but the U.S. has made lots of promises that it never kept. Bound by politics, life is like chess with two egos pitted against each other, and lives and fortunes being moved around on the game board. The Mexicans living in California, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado, and Nevada went to bed one night in Mexico, and the next morning they woke up in the United States. Checkmate. Think of this, if you will. Santa Fe, New Mexico, for example, was founded in 1610, 230 years before the treaty. Los Angeles was founded in 1781, just 5 years after the Declaration of Independence, and 2 years after the founding of Nacogdoches, Texas. So these cities are old, and the Spanish and the Mexicans have been here for a long time. The California Gold Rush attracted millions of whites into lands that used to be dominated by Native Americans and Mexicans. The next wave brought white farmers that bought up the land. The wealthier, more powerful ones also bought the local courts and the law enforcement. To drive wages down, they greedily recruited way too many migrant workers, and then they used the labor surplus to set wages at poverty levels, turning Mexican workers into feudal serfs, creating a class of sharecroppers, just like blacks had been since the end of Reconstruction. As white American families migrated into what used to be Mexico, Hispanic families that had been making their living and living their lives for already hundreds of years began experiencing a gradual reduction in their rights. They experienced discrimination, loss of voting rights, unequal education, and unfair wages. And somewhere along the way, things have been confused. There's a lot of people in America who don't remember that white Americans were actually the intruders. Somehow, a lot of us believe that it's the brown-skinned Mexicans that have unfairly taken advantage of the whites. And so we slap derogatory terms on them because we think that those words justify our position. Music, as a force to call attention to, unify people around, and inspire action about important social causes, is a recurring theme in American music. And it's as true about the Hispanic struggle for justice as it's been for every group in our history. Hispanics have had a wide range of musical inspirations, including familiar faces like Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, and musical heroes from their own communities. Music from the Black civil rights struggle was also borrowed early on, but the most important parts of the cultural foundations that the Chicano community drew from came from their own Mexican heritage, especially the corrido, which we talked about last month in the Roots of Latin American Music episode. As the revolutionary tide of the 60s began to swell in American culture, Chicanos resurrected the corrido and they added to it new political consciousness. giving air to their grievances and struggles.
The sound come distinct? 1, 2, 3, 4, Brownsville, Texas. Is the sound down? Bueno, listo, tira la raya. Go.
Yo cuando era niño, mi padre querido, a pis perseguido feliz me enseñó.
Last month in this episode, The Roots of Latin Music in the New World, we talked about Mexican American corridos. Jose Suarez was a Hispanic singer in the 1930s and 40s who recorded songs that brought attention to the hardships faced by migrant workers of the Dust Bowl era. This is his song, Yo cuando era niño, mi padre querido. It's in a form called habanera music, written in a meter where you can still hear the influence of North African music. This particular song dates back to 1939. The corrido is a narrative about picking cotton with his father when he was a boy and the struggles that they lived through together. Slowly, momentum grew around the Mexican, or Chicano, civil rights movement, marked by strikes, demonstrations, and songs that were sung in both English and Spanish. By the early 1960s, a number of grassroots movements that consisted mainly of urban working class and agricultural workers in the Southwest grew frustrated with the slow progress that traditional, peaceful approaches were having. A more forceful movement was at hand. It was time to turn up the heat. College students were receptive to a new government, and they started calling themselves Chicanos. That word, Chicano, is derived from Mexicano, where the XI is pronounced as she or chi, and the ME in Mexicano was dropped. As activists, they've demanded change now by building coalitions and gathering power. The Chicano movement challenged the assumptions, politics, and principles of the established political leaders, organizations, and activity within and outside the Mexican American community. Discrimination, educational segregation, voting rights, ethnic stereotyping, these were the major issues of the activists, but minimum wages for migrant agricultural workers and citizenship for the children of Mexican-born parents were also important issues. Activist organizations like Cesar Chavez's United Farm Workers and his Crusade for Justice, as well as LULAC, the League of United Latin American Singers, and MAPA, Mexican American Political Association, represented the middle and working class Mexican Americans in the 1960s, as they continue to do today. Strikes and demonstrations helped them gain political ground, and songs helped them voice their concerns and air their demands.
Ser como el aire libre, no más se pasa volando.
The singer, guitarist, songwriter Agustin Lira was an early leader in the Chicano movement. Born in Mexico, he was raised in California as an undocumented migrant farm worker, and he eventually devoted his music to activism. His early life was lived in the fields, picking crops from age 7, and he grew up in poverty around Fresno, and after high school, eventually joining up with Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers. He performed on picket lines, at meetings and rallies, and he became a really important voice for the Chicano movement. This is one of Lira's first compositions. It's called Ser como el aire libre, be like the wind. It's a song about freedom.
Como el aire libre, no más se pasa volando. Ser como la paloma, también se pasa volando. Y ahora que ya soy grande, esas palabras me duelen. vida es larga y yo la paso llorando. Ser como el aire libre, no más se pasa volando. Ser como...
Y que yo he de decir que yo estoy cansado.
In 1966, Hispanic grape pickers went on strike after conditions and pay that they staged a UFW march from Delano to Sacramento. Cesar Chavez needed a song to rally his union members around and asked Lira to write a song his marchers could sing the next day. This is that song, La Peregrinación, the pilgrimage, and it became the anthem of the UFW movement. These are a few of the lyrics translated to English. I do not come to sing, and nor do I come to cry about my bad fortune. From Delano I go to Sacramento to fight for my rights. But what rights are we talking about? Well, let's look at Lira's own example, for instance. Lira's entire family, all U.S. citizens, were deported in the 1930s under the Mexican repatriation program. This program forcefully removed over 2 million people of Mexican descent from the land that their families had owned and lived on for generations. During World War II, Lira's uncles shared the same burden that all American soldiers who had defended freedom had fought for. But, just like the fate that awaited Black American citizens on their return home, they were welcomed back with racism. Just like the Southern blacks, they weren't even allowed to eat at local restaurants or use other public places. Some people called the singer-songwriter Jesus Chuy Negrete the Mexican Bob Dylan. The actor Edward James Olmos called Negrete the Chicano Woody Guthrie, someone who was, quote, like a brother to him. Olmos said that Negrete's ability to make you laugh or make you cry was superb. His song, La Tragedia de Tucson, told the story of the 2011 mass shooting in Arizona when 6 people were killed and more wounded, including former U.S. Representative Gabby Giffords. He was part folklorist, part folk singer, and he told stories about the Mexican American experience. And in the Latin American world, he's considered a superstar. Let's listen to Chuy play.
Up to southern Texas, from Mexico you have come, to the valleys of Edinburgh to toil in the sun with your wife and 7 children. They're working, everyone. But what can you be giving to your brown-eyed children of the sun?
Most importantly, Negrete's music and career was about giving young Chicanos a strong belief in themselves. He'd often perform for prospective students at the University of Houston. And in one of his performances, he told the crowd, "You are Olmeca, Tolteca, Azteca, Chichimeca. You are mestizo." He continued by adding that in pre-Columbian days, we were architects, engineers, mathematicians, botanists, surgeons, philosophers. Yeah, we had a lot going for us, not just frijoles and tortillas. Now, Juan Diaz, co-founder of the Sones de Mexico ensemble, has said that Chuy's legacy, quote, will be reaching scores of young Latinos who felt lost in American society, end quote. the Dylan-esque troubadours like Negrete and Lira. Another popular music in the days leading up to rock and roll was the son jarocho, an African-Mexican song and dance form originating in Veracruz, Mexico. Son jarocho features a guitar-like instrument called a jarana. It's got between 4 and 8 strings. The electric bass is replaced with a bajo sexto, a 12-stringed Mexican bass guitar. The whole point of using these traditional instruments was to create a very definitely Native American sound. As the members of the Chicano rapcore band Aztlan Underground pointed out in an interview, the political underpinnings of this music is to, quote, emphasize the people's connection to the land that was torn from us, to dissect the way in which they, the Spanish and the Americans, have colonized us and made us believe in the white ways and not our own. We wanted to resurrect our true identity. Besides the folk side of the Chicano music movement that we've been listening to, during the 60s and 70s, East LA was ground zero for a wave of Chicano rock bands and individual artists. Cesar Chavez and other leaders within the Hispanic community helped their people reassert their place in society. Some of the youth jumped aboard the late 50s, early 60s youth movement. Rock and roll played an important role in it. And Hispanics looked within their own culture for additional idols and heroes. Richie Valens, originally born Ricardo Valenzuela, was the most popular of the initial group that surged forward. But Chicano rock was an umbrella that covered a lot more than just what came directly from R&B. You'll remember we talked about how R&B led the way into rock and roll during season 1. Go back and check out episodes 12 and 13 from September and October of 21 for lots of great stuff on that. Links can also be found in this episode's notes. The term Chicano rock was actually applied to all the influences that played a role in the Chicano culture, including Mexican mariachi bands, country blues, and even the swamp pop of Louisiana and East Texas. Valens was born in 1941 in a Mexican Native American family, and we don't know a whole lot about him. He was killed too soon after leaving his early mark, in that same tragic plane crash that took Buddy Holly and a few others. We discussed that in episode 13 in season 1. With just a few really strong standout singles, especially La Bamba, Richie, more than anything, paved the way for other Hispanics to follow in his footsteps. But at just 15, he'd formed his first band already with a group of friends from Pacoima High School. Now, makes me think about how many of us might have similar stories about having played in garage bands with friends from school. His band started playing high school dances and local gigs, and they appeared on the radar of a local A&R guy named Bob Keane. Keane had already signed Sam Cooke, for instance. It was Keane who walked Valens into an LA studio to record Come On, Let's Go. This original tune by Valens actually hit number 42 on the Billboard charts. The next single, though, a double A side with another Valens original on one side called Donna, and the other song that we really remember Valens by, La Bamba, on the other.
Para bailar la bamba se necesita una poca de gracia y otra cosita. Ahí arriba, arriba y arriba y me. Yo no soy marinero, pero ti seré.
Para bailar la bamba se necesita una poca de gracia,
With La Bamba, Valens gave this old Mexican correa a whole new identity that literally defined the entire Chicano rock sound. Since the 30s, there have been hundreds of cover versions of this. Wyclef Jean, The Ventures, The Wiggles, The Sugar Beats, and even Glenn Campbell have covered it. Heck, even Weird Al Yankovic did a version called Lasagna. So, Richie Valens had his big hit in '58, and it eventually got to number 2 on Billboard's Top 100. And quick on the heels of that, in early '59, Richie was booked to tour with Buddy Holly on that Midwestern tour called the Winter Dance Party. If you don't know the story, please check out episode 13 from last fall, season 1. It's just a heartbreak of a story. Holly was only 22. Richie Valens, only 18. And that was all the time that we had with this bright light. Of course, we really don't know what might have happened if he'd lived longer. He might have been a one-hit wonder, or he might have been like a Paul McCartney. All we know is that by 18, he did leave us with a few great songs that have lasted.
For goodness sake, I got to hippie shake. Woo! I got to shake. Yeah, the hippie shake.
Other Chicano rockers followed Valens in his passing, including Chan Romero, who recorded the original of Hippie Hippie Shake, a song that the Beatles themselves played in Hamburg and at the Cavern Club. The Texas Chicano blues rocker Freddie Fender, who was born Valdemar Garza Huerta and had 2 big hits with Before the Next Teardrop Falls and Wasted Days and Wasted Nights.
For you don't belong to me, your heart belongs to someone else. Why should I keep loving you when I know that you're not true? And why should I call your name when you're the blame for making me blue? Don't you remember the day that you I had a hammer in the morning, a hammer in the evening, all over this land.
And then Trini Lopez. Now, Trini Lopez was a really big deal in the early 60s, and he had an original sound, kind of a mashup of folk, Latin, and rockabilly. This song, If I Had a Hammer, was his biggest hit. It got to number 3 on Billboard's Hot 100. Lopez was a victim of COVID-19 in 2020. He was 83 by then. By the 50s and 60s, Chicano records were selling really well. I mean, like hotcakes. An indication of increasing Chicano pride and some improvement in their financial situation, too. Depending on the artist, Hispanic musicians were finding their legs on a regional or even, with some artists like Valens, a national or even an international level. And things were also happening on the southern side of the border, too. Mexico, for instance, produced 2 early Latin American bands. One was called Los Teen Tops. A Mexican band called Los Teen Tops brought American and English rock home to their Spanish-speaking compadres. They reworked lyrics to make the songs work better in Spanish. And they got huge in Mexico. Check out their version of Little Richard's Good Golly, Miss Molly. I'm going to help you compare the two lyrics, Little Richard's and Los Teen Tops. In Little Richard's version, the original lyrics and the Teen Tops versions are pretty similar. And later versions, they change though. For instance, verse 1 with Little Richard is, good golly, Miss Molly, you sure like to ball. Good golly, Miss Molly, you sure like to ball. When you're rockin' and a-rollin', can't hear your mama call. Now, Los Teen Tops. Here comes the pest, she sure likes to dance. Here comes the pest, she sure likes to dance. And when she's rockin' and rollin', she's the queen of the place. And again, another comparison from verse 3. Little Richard said, I'm going to the corner, gonna buy a diamond ring. When she hug me and kiss me, make me ting-a-ling-a-ling. And the Teen Tops said, let's go and see a priest. I want to get married now. It's not that you're so pretty, but you sure know how to dance. Remember, this is Spanish translated to English. It works a lot better in Spanish. Beatlemania ruled the world in these years, so it's no big surprise that the fever ran high in South America. Chain Lightning sparked a Uruguayan band called Los Shakers that made their career with Beatles-inspired songs like this one. But they weren't the only ones. There were a bunch that tried to rock out in that same Beatley way. The main guys in Los Shakers, though, were two brothers, Hugo and Osvaldo Fatoruso, who'd gone to the movies one day to see A Hard Day's Night. Out of it, they wrote a hit called Everybody Run, Corran Todos. But their really big song was Break Everything, or Rompan Todos, which made the top 10 in Argentina, Uruguay's much bigger neighbor to the east. Of these two songs, I think this one we're listening to, Corran Todos, or Everybody Run, sounds even more like Help, You're a Beatles. Okay, there's a bunch more we could talk about in South America, but let's go back on the northern side of the border again, okay? Back to Southern California. And in the 60s and 70s, there were hundreds of local garage bands trying to follow in Ritchie Valens' footsteps. Out of all of them, just a few actually made any sort of impact outside Southern Cal. These five, the Midnighters, the Village Callers, Cannibal and the Headhunters, El Chicano, and Tierra, were best known. Collectively, they formed a movement called the East Side Sound. As I've said, Hispanic kids playing rock and roll was a step forward socially. It showed a newfound confidence and brashness among Hispanic youth that made it possible because of the Chicano movement. I mean, the Chicano movement helped everybody hold their heads a little bit higher. It was the direct response to the encouragement and pride that guys like Joey Negrete was putting out there. Midnighters was probably the best band to come out of East LA in the 60s. Indisputably the greatest Latino rock band of the time. Their sound was a blend of British invasion, think the Stones, and American R&B. They had 2 hits. One actually got big across the country. They had kind of an early proto-punk feel to their music, although their lead singer, Willie Garcia, could also do real justice to steamy Latin ballads. You can still hear the echo in bands like Los Lobos today. This is their song, Land of a Thousand Dances. Now, the story of the Village Callers would be familiar to anyone who's ever had a garage band. They formed out of another band called Marcy and the Imperials. For a while, the Imperials went around as them Imperials because the business cards were misprinted and they didn't have enough money to reprint.
Now full of jitterbugs from Pico Rivera, baby. I'm gonna cut one loose for you. Hey, Hector, your mama looking for you.
I think that's kind of funny. Now, there's no one still around who actually remembers how the Village Callers name came in. And anyway, their sound had changed from when they were them Imperials. Like most garage bands, members came in and out of the band on the way to nowhere. By the mid-60s, they were getting gigs at LA clubs. They even won the Battle of the Bands at East LA College in '67. This next band, the Village Callers, their first album was a live recording made at a gritty Pico Rivera, and that's a city in East LA, strip club called the Plush Bunny. Famously, Ike and Tina Turner used to have an annual New Year's Eve gig at that club every year around this time. Anyway, the Callers had a regular set there, and it was all covers of other people's songs. One of them was Evil Ways, a cover of a song written by a jazz guitarist named Clarence Sonny Henry. And it was that recording that got Carlos Santana to make his version of it later. But if ever there was a Cinderella story, this is probably it. Imagine, you're in a small band from the East LA projects, and a year after starting your band, you find yourself touring America as the opening band for Beatles, the biggest band of all time. All the way through the end of the tour and the epic show at the Hollywood Bowl? Sounds like a fantasy, but it isn't.
You know I feel alright, children. Yeah.
You're now listening to that band. Unfortunately, they were pretty much a one-hit wonder too. Their big hit, another version of Land of a Thousand Dances. Their version sounds like this. Unfortunately, their future was troubled almost from the very beginning. During that Beatles tour, one of the band members was called home by his girlfriend, who missed him. When the tour was over, they made a few more recordings, but none of them had the same impact as this song, and the band pretty much faded out of history just about as quickly as they'd arrived on the scene.
Well, go ahead and laugh. Thank you. I appreciate it. But the fact is, I'm here. Now, tomorrow you'll know that I wasn't kidding and you'll think I was crazy. But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.
If Cannibal and the Headhunters' time in the spotlight was brief, the opposite has been true for El Chicano, the most successful of the LA Latino rock bands. With 10 albums released between 70 and 1985, they've produced some classic music. Their major influences were Santana, the Midnighters, Cannibal and the Headhunters, and other East Side bands. They had this very eclectic sound, a mix of rock, soul, funk, jazz, blues, Afro-Cuban soul jazz, and salsa, with heavyweights like Tito Puente and Ray Barreto and Mongo. El Chicano fused a progressive mix of Afro-Cuban, blues, and jazz. They're one of the most successful of the Chicano bands, with Billboard and Cashbox magazines both voting them #1 jazz group of 1970 with their Latin-based album Viva Tirado. But the record that earned them the highest critical praise was Revolucion, which came out a year later. It charted in the United States and in both Central and South America. Over a 50-year span, they've earned 5 gold records. They've recorded 12 albums. Their music's been used on several big film soundtracks. They've been on TV many times, and they've been featured in various documentaries. You can hear it in tracks like this one, Keep Moving, from El Chicano's Revolucion album. In the late 60s and early 70s, as the Vietnam protest movement gathered energy and Cesar Chavez's UFW grew in size and strength, artists like El Chicano and this band called Azteca used their popularity to amplify the messages being expressed in Chicano communities. This is the first track from Azteca's album, Mamita Linda. But my all-time favorite of the East LA bands is Los Lobos. Super talented musicians, influential, and around since the 1970s. lot of people, they first got noticed in the early 80s with their song, Will the Wolf Survive? One of the most important things I think they've done is to introduce traditional sounds to a wider mainstream audience. For instance, David Hidalgo from Los Lobos played the requinto doble and the accordion on this song, Aquí No Será, on an album by another East LA band called Oso Matli. For you musicians, a requinto doble is a 3/4 size version of a standard nylon string guitar, and it's tuned a fourth higher. So instead of tuning E, A, D, G, B, E, it's tuned A, D, G, B, E, A. Another cool thing about this song is how it shows the influence Los Lobos have had on younger musicians. Oso Matli started nearly 25 years after Los Lobos put their first album out. Over nearly 50 years, Los Lobos has earned numerous awards, including 3 Grammy Awards, induction into the Austin City Limits Hall of Fame, and countless congressional and community recognition. These deep thinkers are the pride of their community. Growing up, the members of Los Lobos received a rich education in the blues, rock and roll, jazz, and doo-wop. Living in East LA, where Latin music was everywhere, they complemented those sounds with the music that ran through their Hispanic heritage, such as the bolero, rancheras, music norteña, son jarocho, son huasteco, and cumbias. They learned to play and perform at backyard family parties, weddings, and Mexican restaurants. Their first album, released in 1978, was Just Another Band from East LA. It pushed them into the spotlight. In the active LA punk scene of the late 70s and early 80s, along with bands like the Plimsolls, the Blasters, X, and Black Flag.
Son los que me están matando, que mis lágrimas se están secando con mi pistola y mi corazón. Y aquí siempre paso la vida con la pistola y el corazón.
Los Lobos is a musician's band, and their songs reflect the environment and the consciousness of the barrio in relation to the world around it. They sing about important themes like humanity, pro-immigration, depression, love of self, community, and deep Mexican Chicano culture and Spanish, Mexican, and Latin heritage. Like other great bands, they've changed and progressed from album to album, both sonically and thematically. The one thing that's been constant, though, is their ongoing dedication to their people and their culture. With all the success that they've had, Los Lobos have never left their roots. They've maintained an ongoing commitment to elevating up-and-coming Chicano bands like Chicano Batman and Quetzal. I hope you'll check out the full interview with Los Lobos done by Sound Opinion at City Winery in Chicago. A link to it's on the American Song Facebook page, and a link to it's also found in the notes that come with this podcast episode. Here's a short excerpt.
Dance and dance, still dance until he goes off to sleep.
And we were getting into like the old traditional Mexican music, and so kind of started the thing, and it just kind of snowballed from there. But along the way, some of us still had our rock groups. You know, I was playing in dance clubs and stuff like that for a little while. It went on for a couple of years, but then the Los Lobos thing just got a little more popular. You know, it became more demanding, and there was just more to it. You know, so we started playing colleges and all that stuff, and we would do small talk little like seminars about Mexican folk music and all that stuff. So basically, it was all about, you know, the whole Mexican folk thing. You know, we were all into and we were excited about it and stuff, and that's kind of what got us here. You know?
Well, Chris Morris's book, Dream in Blue, that just came out about the band. Lou, you got a great quote in there. If you are a Chicano and you got married between 1973 and 1980 in East LA, we probably played your wedding. And
off a year or two.
Mostly kids are rebelling against their parents' music, but you guys embraced your parents' music and turned that into a way to make a living for a decade. How did that work? Why this tremendous love for that music that most kids at that age are rebelling against that stuff?
They fed us.
Good answer.
But you can't really talk about Chicano rock without including Carlos Santana, who, for over 50 years now, has been a giant in the rock world.
Change your evil ways, baby, before I stop loving you.
He took his early influence from the Chicano bands that came slightly before him, as well as blues. He's recognized as one of the truly great guitar heroes of the rock age. Santana got his start playing in the bars of Tijuana, Mexico. Starting out on violin when he was 5, he was taught by his father. He transitioned to guitar in his teens and then quickly started playing with a few bands up and down the Strip in Tijuana right before the Summer of Love. He moved to San Francisco and he started the Santana Blues Band in 1966. In '69, coming off a run of gigs at the Fillmore West that started the momentum under his band, Santana were invited to play at Woodstock, where they put on a legendary performance. Under the conditions, that's a pretty amazing statement. You see, on stage and under the influence of psychedelics, Carlos Santana was doing his best to control his guitar, which, in his mind, had become a live serpent. It was the 1960s, man. As a virtuosic guitarist, Carlos has infused the mainstream Anglo form of rock and roll with Latin pop vibes and a healthy dose of old school blues, R&B, and Afro-Cuban rhythms. It's a style all his own. He has also championed important social causes, and by doing it, he has worked to reinforce the positive media profile of his community. A few of the events and causes that he's devoted his time to include have been the 1987 Rock and Roll Summit, a perestroika period festival concert featuring American and Russian bands. Benefit concerts have also been a major focus for Santana. For instance, his appearance at the benefit for the San Francisco Relief Fund. Santana and his wife Deborah founded the Milagro Foundation in 1998, with millions going to support education, healthcare, and creative activities for underprivileged children all over the world. In 2003, he donated the profits from his latest tour to help fight AIDS. Santana has always had a clear vision about his music. His style is a bridge between the Anglo and Hispanic cultures, and through the decades, he has stayed true to that journey. Doing this created a larger musical audience for that style, and this made it easier for other musicians to carve out their own places in the music industry. Santana has had a career full of hits. Black Magic Woman, Smooth, Oyo Como Va, just to name a few. Over 50 years, he's played for over 150 million fans and sold more than 90 million records, with a top 10 hit every decade since the 1960s. In 1998, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In 2009, he received the Billboard Latin Music Awards Lifetime Achievement Honor for all the success he's had in the music industry. There's always more I could share on any given topic, especially the contribution that the Mexican people have made to American music. But like anything, where do you draw a line? So I'm going to fade this episode and invite you to check out the next one about what our Hispanic brothers and sisters from Puerto Rico have given to this country's music scene. As always, I thank you for spending some time with me today, and I invite you to join the American Song Podcast page on Facebook. This has been Joe Hines. Que te vaya bien todos.
Forget about it.